Oh, beautiful. Oh, they fully got wiped out. I'm playing Ogres today, and yeah, I'm running Greasus. Probably one of the worst legendary lords in the game right now, at least when it comes to multiplayer. Because he's a really slow Ogre Lord, a giant target, and his damage ain't that good anyways. So why did I bring exclusively Greasus to a tournament? Well, mostly just to flex, but this challenge might have been a bit more than I can chew. Really, the only redeeming factor that he has is that he has a really small rampage aura, but because he's not really fast, it's very hard to hit targets with it. And game 1 goes basically how you'd expect a Greasus only tournament run to go, and we get wrecked pretty hard. I'm trying to rush my opponent down, and while the fighting's going on, my opponent is sending the Sphinx of Uzkap, a very powerful single entity, into my ogres. And Greasus can neither catch this single entity or even fight it. He gets deleted off the battlefield, and that's game number 1 lost. But this doesn't mean we're out of the tournament. If I win my next 3 games, I'm definitely making it to semifinals. And after my first match, I realized, maybe it's not Greasus that's losing these matches. It could just be my builds. So I went into the second game using Golg's Maneaters and a fan favorite, Lead Belchers. They got cannons stuffed full of random scrap that they shoot at their enemies, and boy are they powerful, specifically on this map too. I'm up against the hypermobile beastmen, but by cramming my units into this choke point on the map, I'm able to use the Lead Belchers to cover 2 points at once. And because a choke point means all the fighting's in a very localized area, Greasus can actually use his leadership boost kind of effectively in this battle. Gold Maneaters will basically fight to the last, and I even get a chance to use Greasus's Rampage to get cavalry to chase him instead of my Lead Belchers. Now, does that mean Greasus actually has a use? No, not really. He barely gets any value this game in actual melee, despite grinding down to about half HP. But at least he's a pretty decent support tool for the rest of the Ogre Kingdom's roster. And in game number 3, inspired by the extremely high leadership of Gold's Maneaters, I take 3 of them to go for basically a Death Star. That means having an unstoppable core of units that stick very tightly together, which generally does well against factions like Chaos, who don't have a lot of range tools. And because my units are pretty close together, guess what? Greasus is gonna be mildly useful again. His leadership aura means my units are not gonna rout, and that means my singular Lead Belcher can fire away without having to worry about being dived on. The threat of Greasus's Rampage too is really nice because sometimes your opponents will make a big dive, rout off your Lead Belchers, and then disengage to chase them off. But because Greasus can just Rampage my opponent's units onto other targets, that's basically a non-option. So how does this go exactly? My opponent straight up leaves because he feels like he just can't fight my army and doesn't even want to bother playing the match. Honestly, while anticlimactic, it is understandable. But god dang, leaving a match against Greasus, like the memeiest of meme lords, I can't believe it. But can he stand up against one of the sweatiest factions in the game? Yes, that's right, it's Slaanesh. I have a game plan though, and it's very similar to the last game. I got my Death Star, and I got a Spirit Leech Lord to snipe his very spooky lord. It's a keeper of secrets, and Greasus absolutely is not winning that fight without a little bit of magic support. He's brought a lot of infantry and has a good amount of horsemen to skirmish my forces, but because I have Lead Belchers, his horsemen really aren't going to do too much, and my Maneaters are perfect for his infantry. And an interesting thing about Slaanesh, they really only start to power up when units rout around them. If units aren't routing, they don't build up any of their powerful army abilities, and that means as long as we don't lose any of our engagements, Slaanesh won't really be able to power up to maximum throttle. And you know what? Maybe Greasus helps a little bit in this situation. His leadership aura keeps my guys fighting for much longer than expected, and slowly but surely, Slaanesh gets worn down over time. And when they're finally out of units, I just have to capture the rest of the points. Something that ogres are really good at with their fairly high base movement speed. And this means, with the hardest faction out of the way, we're now fighting in the semifinals in an Ogre Kingdom's mirror match. And boy was this battle an absolute grind. My opponent went for a very ranged heavy army, But Greasus is so slow, I can't exactly rush him with my Lord. I do have 2 Iron Blasters, but they're not the fastest trading unit in the game. And my opponent has a not so secret tool that we managed to spot. An Eshin Maneater is lurking around, and that means Greasus could die at any moment. There's quite a few assassination attempts on Greasus, so I have to keep a bodyguard unit near him at all times. And while Greasus himself doesn't really get any value, the bodyguards do quite a bit. I guess Greasus's gold pile is just way too alluring because my opponent loses almost all of his assassins trying to snipe Greasus, but none of them manage to succeed, and my Maneaters get loads of value. Of course, this doesn't mean Greasus is good. My opponent just misplayed trying to kill a guy that he's probably not used to trying to snipe. And I should note too, Greasus is not actually tankier than most Ogre Lords. He just looks like a prime target to snipe because you know he's slow. So you're gonna go for some riskier plays than maybe you're used to. Anyways, we do barely scrape out a win, but I mostly chalk it up to my opponent's misplays and the fact that he summons in Sky Striders, who are not especially strong, I'd say. Honestly, I think Maneaters are probably better, which is why we took the Sky Striders in our final game. We're now in the grand finals, and if I'm going to win with Greasus, we're gonna win with a bang. I'm up against Bretonia, which can be a little bit of an awkward matchup. They got a lot of archers, which can shoot you up, but I figured if we ever get into a tussle, I can kind of just march forwards and crump them. Alberic, however, is in the skies, and he's a pretty big threat to your greasy boy over here. Once again, though, I assign a bodyguard of Maneaters, which keeps Alberic back, but can my Iron Blaster, my glorious mobile cannon, really get a lot of value against the Bretonian Knights and Peasants? Well, not really. It does a little bit of damage to his cavalry, but my opponent does an excellent job using line of sight and trees to block my shots, and I kind of find myself struggling to take space against my opponent. They have a better range advantage on this particular map and situation, so I opt for plan B, using my very nice mobility to swing onto different points, and using my speed to maybe steal some points back. Even bringing in the Sky Striders, such as my Hubris. I know I denounced them earlier, but people in chat wanted to see them, and I felt like, maybe I can make them work. They're mobile, they can probably contest against my opponent's cavalry, and once my opponent is pulled out far enough, I pull the trigger and go for a big engagement. So I'm able to capture all 3 points while fighting, but the Sky Striders don't really crush my opponent's cavalry too well. Because while they are really good at killing large targets, even with a little bit of infantry, they get pulled apart pretty quickly. And even Gold's Maneaters are kind of underperforming against the massive amounts of cheap armored cavalry my opponent's sending my way. The fight is hard fought, but I'm not able to jump onto my opponent's archers, and slowly but surely we fall behind on the value trading. And honestly, as much as I want to blame Greasus, he's probably not the reason we lost this battle. I'd say my Iron Blaster was just not very good for this map, and my Maneaters were kind of put into a bad position because of my bad play. I'm thinking I probably would have had a much better shot at this battle with Lead Belchers, and you may notice that means this tournament wasn't lost because of Greasus. Despite being an extremely large meme, I guess he wasn't the weakest link. It came down to my own decision making and slightly suboptimal build selection. Of course, my opponent played really well too, but I genuinely feel like I had a shot here. So does that mean I'm gonna try and win a tournament now with Greasus? No, probably not. In the end, he's a 1,500 gold waste of cash. With a good build and solid micro, you can absolutely make up that deficit, but it is a deficit, and there's absolutely lords that can fight better than Greasus and move faster at the same time too, while also being a smaller target to hit. But was it a fun challenge using Greasus? I'd say yeah. Now if you do want to see how these games play out live, to check out my micro, or to encourage me to try other crazy memes, I got a link to my streams in the description. You can find me streaming European evenings or American afternoons.